Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's call. Today's topic is going to be very interesting. We've got Jeremy Hyde from Sun Country Airlines, Melissa Pollock, and Danielle Latham. My name is Dylan Max. I'm the VP of Marketing over here at AmplifAI, and we're going to be talking about how CX leaders can bend time and space to achieve a winning culture of accountability. And just to show you guys that we're qualified to talk about this, each of the speakers over here have over 20 years of experience in contact centers and leadership, which makes them experts in this topic. And each of them have over 20 months of experience in AI, which also makes them experts in what we'll be discussing later. I will go ahead and enable the chat and let Danielle take it away.
Thank you so much, Dylan. So Jeremy, I thought it would be a good idea to start the conversation by talking about how to set a culture of accountability in the contact center. So first question is, how should accountability be defined within the contact center?
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. So, starting out, I've walked into centers where it was essentially a clean slate. And I don't mean that it was a brand new center that I was starting. I mean, there was no goals, accountabilities, no clear outcomes. Everybody just kind of would show up and do their best, but what they were aiming for or what their best should be focused on was pretty unclear. And in those situations, you end up with a lot of people that are really well-meaning, but we're not, rowing in the same direction, so to speak. And so it can be really chaotic, and it can feel like you never quite can get your footing, and you never know, are we winning? Are we losing? Are we doing well? Are we not doing well? And so, when you're walking into a situation like that, I think a starting point is what are the most important things? What are the most important goals and outcomes that we should be striving towards as kind of a starting point? And then you start to break that down. Okay, if we want to achieve this thing, this lofty goal, then how do we start to break that down into smaller things that if we achieve them each and every day, we believe that we will achieve this big goal. And then the next step is kind of understanding what part do each of us play in that? And we talk a lot about within my team just about kind of being laser focused on the right things. And if we're all focused on the same things and we're all focused on everything, then we're definitely not laser focused, right? There's about 1,000 things a day, probably more than that are happening and need to happen. And if it's not clear what your role is in that and what my role is in that, then the likelihood that we're going to achieve our goals is low. And so that starting point is just really at a basic level. What are the 3 to 5 things you need to be laser focused on that are going to help us achieve that big goal? What are the 3 to 5 things I need to be laser focused on to help us achieve that goal? I think that's really where it starts.
So speaking of being able to be laser focused on 3 to 5 things, what are the best KPIs used in use to measure accountability?
It definitely is different by role, right?
Yeah.
But, if we think about our frontline contact center team members, it's usually pretty basic. It's number one, do you show up when you're supposed to show up? Are you present? That's a starting point. But then it really, they tend to kind of boil down into some combination of quantity and quality.
Yeah.
I know for some, quantity can be a taboo or touchy topic. I don't think it is personally, but at the end of the day, I need can I help the amount of customers that I need to be able to help? Can I do it well? Am I giving them accurate information? Am I serving them in a way that's kind? Am I delivering the sort of experience that we're aiming for? But quantity, showing up, quantity, quality, some kind of mix of that typically.
Yeah, so it sounds like quality related metrics, and then productivity, right? That productivity, when you hear while we're paying you, are you, putting an honest day's work in for an honest day's pay?
Yeah. How do you manage your time? And are you proficient?
Yes.
It's really about being efficient and effective, and kind of those those two together I describe as being proficient. So it's like I know the job well. I can navigate the systems to get my answers. I know the answers. Communicate effectively with with kindness and empathy, and so it's like they all kind of go together that way.
So once you've made the determination what we need to be laser focused on, how are those expectations communicated to the employees?
So I think that this is a really important piece of things. Everything that we've talked about so far in the first few minutes, like nothing is earth shattering here, right? Like, hey, we have goals, like we hold people accountable to those goals, and it's quantity and quality. Everybody listening is like, okay, cool. I'm glad we got Jeremy from Sun Country on. I think where things can get tricky though is, to your point, how and when do we communicate these things? Frequency, medium. And so a lot of times, we might be having a conversation about your performance 6 weeks after it happened. And so how am I able to understand what's happening as close as possible to when it happens, so I have an opportunity to change? And when it gets really far, I mean, our memories are short, right? You want to talk to me about something that happened 4 to 6 weeks ago, like I barely remember what happened before coffee this morning. So I think like the frequency and the means of providing that information is nearly as critical as having the right things in place, the right measures in place. So again, nearly real time, instantaneous, having direct access for the individuals themselves, because they probably want to be able to check on those things themselves, but then also having kind of a clear time and place, like where we're going to work on these things together, the leader and that partnership. Yep, exactly.
I think it's also important to point out that if you're talking to me 6 weeks after something happened, I don't even remember how I got there, and I'm probably caught by surprise, right? Like, wait a minute, my AHT is that high? So I think the frequency piece is important, just so that, number one, I understand how I got there, but also so that I'm not caught by surprise and we don't waste a lot of time, talking about how it's calculated because I don't agree with it, because I don't remember the last time we talked about it. So I think that frequency piece is very important.
I remember
Danielle.
As an agent walking into a session with my supervisor, years and years ago, and being completely confused and caught off guard. It was the first time that I recall certain numbers ever being placed in front of me.
Wow.
And they spoke about them in terms that I didn't quite understand. And it was difficult for me to understand how the things that I was doing from day to day or moment to moment influenced this thing.
Yeah.
And so if it's just a number on a piece of paper or on a spreadsheet and I don't understand or believe that I have influence or control over it, I don't understand it, why it is, what it is, and it's something that happened so long ago that, to your point, like all of that is in the past, you're not going to get me to buy in and understand that if there is something that I can do or should do differently, like you can't get me to buy in if I don't even understand what we're talking about from the start.
The orientation of it too is a combative conversation. If I don't have any idea until you sit down with me and it's weeks later or even days later, if I've got no access myself and it's something you're presenting me with, to your example, Jeremy, and you're not familiar necessarily with the terms, it's the first time you're seeing it, or you have to wait to see it till after the fact, till someone provides it to you, the conversation is combative. And this was a really big point for another one of our clients. They were really trying to change the culture of the frontline leaders' relationships with their associates. And part of that culture change was changing the conversation that's being had in a coaching and recognition context. And a big part of that was, do folks already know how they're doing, so that when you sit down to have a conversation, it's a different approach. They already know, they already have it, they already see it, they're well aware of it, they can have ownership, they can have self-accountability. And so instead of going over where you are on everything, the conversation becomes much friendlier, A, but more strategic, B. So it's a really interesting dynamic.
Let's see how the audience feels about this and what the challenges are, or maybe they're already having access to this.
While our friends are taking the poll, Melissa, I want to take what you were just saying kind of like one step further and give a really specific example too. So, my supervisor put some numbers in front of me, and I have, number one, no clue what they are, what they mean. But again, zero understanding of how I can influence or control them, right? So at that point, I'm confused, I'm frustrated, it doesn't feel fair or whatever. Handle time, I think, is a really great example of one of these, right? The reason that there's so much concern and pushback from team members about handle time is it's really difficult to understand how to influence it. And so if you walk into that conversation and you say, hey, you're building 5 widgets an hour and we need you to build 10, your handle time is this and it needs to be that. That's not helpful. Like, I understand the words that you're saying in the order that you're saying them, but in terms of what action I should take, I have no clue. Right. To have a really great coaching conversation about handle time, you might not even talk handle time. Those words may never come out of your mouth. Instead, what it might sound like is, I've noticed that in the beginning of a conversation with the customer, you don't seem to be understanding the request in this, and then you end up going down this path and it's not the right path, and then you have to rework and whatever. So let's talk about, in the beginning of our conversations, summarizing to make sure we understand, and then we can hit the ground running. It's like, what is the specific breakdown? Is it communication skills? Is it navigating the systems? Is it controlling the call? Whatever. But like breaking that down into things that person can then understand. Like, oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, sometimes I do misunderstand them. And like, that's such a different conversation than, hey, build more widgets, be faster, reduce X seconds from here or that.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good point. So the associate, you've had that substantive conversation, the associate gets it, and they achieve some level of success. How do you think those successes or achievements should be recognized or celebrated?
I mean, frequently near the time that they happened. We, over the years, we've put a concerted effort on recognition. Now, some of it is kind of self-driven. I mean, we touched on this earlier, like being able to see how I'm performing and kind of like be happy because I've achieved my own goal. Like, that's one piece of it. Having that kind of one-on-one recognition from your leader to you is another piece of it. Doing some celebrating at kind of a team level where people, within your group can kind of see like, hey, you've achieved something. And then we've really done a lot around peer-to-peer recognition. I think it's cool to hear from your boss that you've done a good job. I also think you expect that, right? It might not happen for a lot of people the way that it should, but there is an expectation that, like, if I'm doing well, my boss is going to recognize that and they're going to tell me that. But when one of your colleagues says, dang, Danielle, I just have to give you a shout out because you have done this thing exquisitely, that just hits different. And so we've put a lot around that. I mean, every week we're trying to encourage people, and we'll kick it off, hey, we wanted to shout out so-and-so for this and that thing or whatever. But we've really seen kind of this snowball happen where it just becomes a natural thing. It's just part of our culture now that, like, we love to recognize each other for the work that we're doing. We have a monthly leadership meeting, and it's like team leads and above. And the first probably 15 minutes of that meeting is me reading all of the recognition that got sent from all of the leaders to recognize each other. Again, Danielle did this amazing thing. Melissa, thank you for supporting me as I was transitioning to this project. Dylan, I really needed help with this tough problem, and you knew exactly and it's just like, it creates this culture where, while we're going to talk about the things that aren't going right, that's just always going to be part of the environment. That's not all that anybody is hearing. They're hearing about all the good things as well.
I like that kind of the peer recognition, because like you said, the person who I'm sitting next to, it feels good to know that although that person is working, they're kind of paying attention to me, and maybe I'm even able to inspire them or teach them something that they didn't know. So speaking of peer recognition, how have you found that maybe team members are also holding each other accountable as well?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think there's always this like balance and slight tension, perhaps, where like there's certain levels of accountability that clearly live with the boss, but there are norms, of kind of accountabilities that are going to happen within the team. And again, I think that a big part of this comes back to kind of the team environment and culture that you build, where we're here to support each other. We want to win together. We want to make sure we're taking care of our customers and all that sort of thing. And so like if that is at the center of who you are from a cultural perspective, then giving that feedback to a colleague, it's not a problem, because it's not like I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to help you.
Yeah.
And so I think you'll see that. And the thing is, like, that happens naturally, and to some extent it's going to happen no matter what.
Yeah.
And so that's just where we have to create that right environment where people are okay to say those things. And I encourage my team. I'll say all the time, like, I want you to tell me if you think I'm wrong. Like, I will state my opinions. You will have no question where I stand on something, but like, I want you guys to challenge me. I want you to push back. I want you to tell me if you think that something is incorrect. And I kind of look for opportunities here and there to call myself out in front of others, including frontline team members and whomever, be a little self-deprecating, but to kind of point out, like, we're going to make mistakes. We won't be perfect. That's okay. As long as we're doing our best and we're open to feedback and we're open to change, like, that's all I can ask for.
I think you bring up a really good point. My next question was going to be, how do you promote transparency and openness? But it sounds like you just answered that, right? Recognizing the fact that, hey, I don't have all the answers. That's why we're a team. Pointing out when, hey, I thought it was this and it wasn't this, but also, hey, let me present something to you and poke some holes in it. How, can we break this down and then build it back up together?
I think sometimes I freak new team members out a little bit, because I'll kind of pop up in ways that they don't expect. I try and stay really close to kind of all of the teams and different roles, and close to the customer and all of that. But, I might pop up in like the team's chat channels where people are engaging and interacting or asking questions. And I think, like, because of my title, they're like, whoa, what is Jeremy doing here? Like, why is he answering this, basic question, or, that sort of thing. But again, purpose behind these sorts of things, like, I want them to see me, know me. I want to tear down some of that kind of built-in assumptions about hierarchy and who's right and who's wrong. And the fact that we have people whose job it is to evaluate your performance doesn't mean that they're always right and you're always wrong. Like, this should be a two-way conversation, and kind of reminding the team of that as well. Quality evaluations, like, we got to make sure that we can have a two-way discussion, because there might be a really reasonable reason that somebody did something that doesn't kind of fall into our standards and norms. And if that was reasonable, we should have a venue to kind of hear them out and listen on that. They're doing the job every day in a way that we aren't. And so we can't assume that we have all the answers.
I'm really curious about what moment in time made you decide, hey, I'm going to put my stick in the ground and I'm going to make accountability as a culture change a priority?
It was tricky because it was like immediately when I joined the organization, and you hate to walk in as a new leader and start questioning everything and acting like things are wrong, broken. So there was this kind of like, I had to watch and listen and build relationships and start to build some trust and whatnot for a little while anyways, before I could hit things real hard. But it was pretty clear to me kind of right away that, again, kind of talking about, like, people are super well intentioned. Most people show up and they want to do good work and they want to help their team members and do a good job and all that sort of thing. But there was a hesitancy or perhaps actual barriers by some previous leaders to create accountability. And I think, again, while that might have been well intentioned, maybe they thought like, hey, we're super nice and like we just kind of let people do their thing or whatever, but that doesn't lead to success, because nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing if it's the right thing, and nobody's having these crucial conversations to kind of redirect and all that. So it was basically immediately I knew that had to happen. I had to wait a little bit so that I didn't seem like an arrogant jerk that, first day was like everything's wrong. But then I had to really quickly and very firmly start putting some stakes in the sand and saying like, all right, like these things have to change. Here's why. I'm trying to make this better for everybody. And like, you're going to see the change and it's going to feel uncomfortable, but I promise you it's going to be good. So yeah, it was a bit of a challenge in the beginning.
I think, Jeremy, you brought up a really good point, because you do want to assert yourself as the expert, like, trust me, I'm leading from the front, but you do want to gain the respect and the buy-in from folks. So it is important to take some time to understand the landscape. Although you may know in your heart, I already know what's going on here, but to show the people that you're going to be leading, hey, I'm going to take a moment to understand the dynamic here. And you do that maybe in an effort to learn, but also in an effort to gain their buy-in and their respect. Like, look, I've taken the time to learn the language, to understand kind of what might be going on deeper, but ultimately I'm responsible, I'm going to lead. And, these are the efforts that I'm making to get you on my wagon.
Yeah. Well, and time creates clarity. There are some things, from contact center to contact center, there are certain things that are just true and best practices are best practices. But then there's a lot of context that you might not have as you enter a new industry, organization, whatever the case may be. And so, to the extent that you can, like if somebody finds themselves in that sort of a position, I'm with a new organization, a new role, maybe a new industry, giving yourself that time to gain the context, because sometimes things seem obvious when they're not also. And we have to get clarity in our mind of like, all right, I've put all of these things in a box. Like now I have to revisit and validate like which things were correct and which weren't. Changing industries, I think like you can be humbled pretty quickly. Again, I stepped into kind of the senior leader role, and just right away I'd end up on these conference calls like something's going wrong and we need to like take action as a result. Jeremy, what should we do? And I'm like, I have no idea. I don't even understand the question, to be frank with you. Like, what should we do in regards to what? Well, what sort of service recovery should we do? That's a great question. What would we normally do? Because I have zero frame of reference as to what would be a normal response. Well, normally we would do this. Okay, we should do that then. I don't know. Do you agree? Should we do that? So in the beginning too, there was a lot of this, like, you guys, I don't know anything. Like, you tell me, and I'll let you know if I think that makes sense. But yeah, so it is. I think, getting back to the original point, there are certain things that they just are what they are. But then there's a lot of things that, if you apply what the norm was from a previous situation, you could miss the mark because you're missing the context of the new organization that you're working within.
So Jeremy, I'd like to go back to working out how an organization kind of promotes that transparency and ownership of accountability. Let's talk about coaching practices and how often is coaching happening? How is coaching being trained to your frontline leaders? So how often is it happening, and what training are those frontline leaders going through in order to prepare them to be better coaches?
Coaching for us kind of happens between a couple of different roles. When it comes to like the sort of technical aspect of the job, and when I say technical, I don't mean like IT necessarily, but like, what is the process? What is the policy? How do I navigate the system? What is the correct answer? Was 2 + 2 4, or did I get to 5? That sort of thing. Much of that tends to be at our frontline leader level, team lead, QA, even some peer senior agents, that sort of thing. And that sort of thing is happening daily, kind of as things pop up and are identified. And those, those are generally simpler, safer. I don't know what word I want to use there, but those ones are not usually ones where there's going to be like defense mechanisms popping up as a result, right? It's like, hey, let's walk through this process. And so those folks that are in those roles, first of all, almost exclusively kind of grow up within the organization. We tend to hire from one position in our department and then grow everything from there, rather than hiring from outside of the organization into something like a team lead role. If you think about a team lead, like that person should be an expert in what we do, right? A subject matter expert. And so as we promote folks from agent to senior agent to team lead to whatever the case may be, they are true experts in the work that we do each day. Now there's more kind of development and kind of helping understand guardrails for exceptions and that sort of thing. But at that level, that the focus is really like making sure that they have the expertise, they understand guardrails in terms of making decisions and exceptions. And those are slightly more casual. Maybe casual is not the right word, but types of conversation. So like that sort of thing is happening all the time, all day, every day. It might be like, hey, let's hop off real quick because I just noticed this thing where we had this conversation, like finish helping the customer, and then let's debrief real quick and kind of
real time.
Real time.
Yeah.
The other stuff though, it's like which is going to be more like standard review of performance, looking at scorecard, or maybe if the discussion is starting to get a little bit more difficult, the nature, then those are happening a couple times a month for most everyone, maybe a little bit more frequently depending on where somebody is at in things. But we've kind of broken out at the assistant manager level for us, which is the direct people leader of our frontline agents. Every month they're having at least one-on-one per person and a team meeting. We kind of went back and forth over time, and we found that when we were doing kind of just the one-on-ones, that's great, but folks were really missing what they can get out of these team meetings where they're having conversations together. And because we're in a fully remote environment, they were missing out on that opportunity to get this sort of kind of face time, if you will, with their peers as well. So that's what it looks like for us. There's the real-time stuff. There's stuff that we find that like, oh, let's address it quickly, provide that guidance. And then probably every couple of weeks, though, you're getting together with your leader, either in a group or a one-on-one type environment.
Okay. And then, so you shifted to this culture of accountability shortly after you joined the organization. In what ways did you see performance change after realizing that shift?
When we talk about change management, there was somebody that kind of described big changes in change management as like trying to turn like what are those big boats that they have, the freight liners or whatever they are. I'm gonna mess it up. I'm trying to quote this thing and I'm doing a horrible job. But those really gigantic boats, let's just say that they don't turn quickly, right? So if you're headed north and you need to go south, you are gonna turn slowly, and that's just the way it is. Otherwise, you're gonna dump all your cargo. And so it took some time. And there was, I think people over time see things come and go. And so, to really get behavior change and habits to change, whatever, it takes consistency and it takes time. So it took a bit of time, but once we got there and it's like, no, this is who we are. This is what we do. This is how we do things. One of the most significant things was our productivity doubled. And that's not hyperbole. That's not me inflating numbers. Again, because there was no clear kind of understanding of who was spending their time on what, when, how, why. People did their best and made decisions with the information that they had, which was what was right in front of them in the moment. And we didn't even understand the value of helping people be really proficient and how like a customer doesn't want to spend 40 minutes on the phone with you if they don't have to, right? They'd prefer to spend 0, but if they do have to call, like they probably, for the most part, like want to be able to get their answer and move on with their day. And so productivity was like a double. Customer satisfaction there were some things too, a lot of things where there was actually no baseline. So it was like we had to start with a baseline of where we were at and then kind of see and grow from there. Customer satisfaction increased like 15 to 20%. And then we just found this sweet spot where we're just consistently there. And similar things with first contact resolution as well. It's just we saw this kind of 10 percentage point jump and then just kind of stuck there. And it's infrequent that we see volatility in these numbers. That is the other thing I would say, though, is when we first started to see the jumps and these improvements on any one of these things, for a long time there was a lot of volatility in it. And so like we would get a gain and then we would fall back, and we'd have a gain and we'd fall back, and it was really hard to move things and then keep them there. But the just constant, consistent, making sure that we're laser focused, like over time we got to a point where to see a lot of movement in any of these areas is pretty rare.
Would you say that your assistant manager and your associate's ability to get that real-time feedback, have like the access to their AHT, their agent survey data, without someone having to feed it to them, would you say that helps to support that accountability, that culture of accountability?
For sure. We made these gigantic gains through, sheer brute force and manual effort and creating spreadsheets and just like working really, really hard. I think what helped us continue to achieve success and then achieve more of that consistency and some of those things was making it so that it wasn't so much work just to try to understand what was happening and deliver that information. And this is where we've had a lot of conversations over the last year and a half or what have you, where you guys have really kind of helped us take that next step. Is we used to spend most of our time trying to prep and understand what is Danielle's performance, where is it, what is it. So I'm pulling 80 different reports and I'm trying to snip them into a scorecard, and by the time the work week or the work day is over, like I'm out of time. And so it's like, all right, at least I know whether or not Danielle is performing or not. I'm out of time now. So I don't know, hopefully next time I can influence Danielle to meet performance or whatever. And so the paradigm has shifted for us now, where most of that just kind of happens. And now we can try and understand, if I'll pick on myself instead of you, Danielle, if Jeremy's not performing, if he's not meeting some expectation, I can understand why and be spending time with Jeremy versus spending 1,000 hours just to know that Jeremy's not performing. And that's been a pretty gigantic shift for us.
Yeah. So now that we've established the fact that you are no longer having to spend that time gathering from here, collating it, preparing this package to meet with the associate. Now you've got more time, more energy, more motivation to pour into that actual coaching conversation. So I kind of want to shift the conversation to some strategies for moving from data mining towards having more meaningful coaching conversations. So how can you shift from just focusing on data to using that data as a tool to direct the conversation?
And I think that this is where we have to figure out how to make a lot of this stuff happen on its own in an automatic way. AmplifAI is a great way of doing that. There are other ways of doing it as well. But I will just say, like, if any one person or many people has to spend hours and hours and hours just to understand what's happening, it's going to be tough. When you go and talk to frontline leaders, like how often, especially in a contact center, like how often do you come across them? They're like, I'm running out of things to do. I've got nothing but time on my hands. I'm not.
But who said that?
Exactly. Like it doesn't. But a big part of that is because they're put into these positions to try and pull all of this stuff together, and it's hard and it takes a long time. And you see a glimpse of something, but you don't understand where it's coming from or what's causing it. But you're out of time. And so it's just that the short answer is you got to figure out how to make this stuff available to people as easily as possible, both the frontline team member, but then that leader as well, so that they can then reinvest that time. Our team leads used to spend a lot of time kind of in support of the assistant managers, pulling reports, pulling data, pulling together scorecards. And I mean, each one of them would spend several hours a day doing this sort of thing. And when this changed, nearly all of their that time was reinvested to being available to our team members. Now, some of that maybe is like to have coaching conversations, but some of it was like our internal Q&A line. I've got a question, I need help, or I need a supervisor or whatever. We saw our speed of answer for that internal line drop significantly because we were taking hours per person and repurposing it back into that. That's good for the agents. They love that. But also, guess what happened to our handle time for our frontline agents? It dropped as a result of that as well. Because when they did need to call out for help and support, they weren't waiting as long to get through to. And so it's like all of these things, it's like when you make them work better, it's not just the one thing that changes. There's other things that are influenced as well.
And that's what we're seeing in the results, right? Over a third of the people here say that it's over 60% of their time spent on just preparing the coach and collecting those data points. And
that's exactly where
yeah. And to be fair, these numbers are skewed because there's actually a lot of customers, AmplifAI customers on this call that are bringing that 21 to 40% number where it's at. So to be able to flip that paradigm, that's massive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think most organizations probably have an aspirational goal of, spend 80% of your time with your associates and 20% of your time, pulling numbers, but there aren't any real solutions that they've deployed to allow the leader to do that. It's kind of just expected that you figure it out. So what would you say was the biggest kind of contributor to being able to shift from that data mining to the more substantive conversation?
For the last 15, 20 years, I just thought you had to do it that way. It was really hard. It took a lot of work. And, in the kind of earlier part of our journey, we found some ways to make things work better. We have some folks within our team that are dedicated to data reporting, that sort of thing. And we have some folks within our team that can build things in our platforms. And so they're like, we were at least delivering some reports in an automated way and saying like, look, here's the data for this, and here's the data for this, and so like we were taking baby steps. And again, like that's just what I had always known. So it was like, all right, well, hey, that's pretty cool. They don't have to go and manually pull that report, and it just gets teed up to them. That's cool. And I think it was through kind of some of the networking that me and some of my leaders do through various, organizations, associations, and then just kind of peer-to-peer stuff out there where we learned of other ways of doing things, organizations like AmplifAI and some others that it's like, look, this is what we do, is we make this stuff easier for you. It's going to sound like I'm up here like giving a sales pitch, and I'm not. It's really true though. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that AmplifAI does, but the thing to me that stood out amongst all the rest was all of the time that we were going to get back that we could repurpose, so that when I was saying, or my leaders were saying, we should be spending X% of our time with the agents, and then you look at it and you go, that is not realistic.
How?
And exactly how. Like if I have to, and you watch them create the thing and copy and paste and this and that and whatever, and save it out to this file and then move it over to that file, and you realize that if that's how you're set up, it's hard. You're just not going to be able to spend that time with the team members that you want to be able to spend. And so that was just really the big turning point for us, is getting out of that business and back into the business of just spending time with our team.
Absolutely. Did you find that you were able to also repurpose that time to developing your supervisors, right, on their coaching and their leadership competencies?
Absolutely. And I think just to the general point of development, you know, I kind of talked about like we really only hire into the organization in one role for the most part. And then we grow from within. Like that wasn't always the case. There was a point in time where we didn't have the bench strength that we needed to fill certain roles internally. But when we get that time back, I mean, we're promoting over the last several years 10 to 20% of our frontline team members into elevated roles on an annual basis. And that is as a result of us having the time so that each person in their respected role can be doing the development and the growth and the coaching that they can do to help build people up. And now, generally, we have a bunch of qualified candidates internally to move into a new role. And we have, you know, this luxury of like, hey, we have, you know, here's the best person. And now there's like 3 others that are ready to go, you know, for the future. So
that's a really good position to be in, because a lot of times you may have to end up going to an external candidate because you don't have the bench strength built up on your internal team.
Yeah, it takes the terrific talent that you already have. You've grown them from within. You talked about that earlier, Jeremy. It takes procedures, and you've defined internally how to do the work, right? And then it takes technology in these days, especially to create efficiency, to, you know, boost productivity. And those things that used to be like bonuses, you know, add-ons that made life cool if you had it, have become more like detractors if you don't have it for employees, right? Because it's so essential to automate and close loop. And when all of that is done manually, to your point, the people who suffer are both the frontline leaders trying to do all of that and the frontline associates, and then, of course, your customers. Mm-hmm. So it's this trifecta ripple effect, which is why we talk about how if we focus on employee experience, by equipping people to do the job we've actually hired them to do in a productive, efficient, and fun way, you know, then the benefits are insurmountable because they affect employee experience, which affects employee retention, which affects employee productivity and buy-in and motivation, which absolutely affects your customers and their experience. So it's win-win. And I see it really simply, which is you've got the great talent, you've got the procedures, but are you investing in your people in technology that supports efficiency and effectivity in ways that wasn't even possible even a little over a decade ago, right? All of this is very recent in that sense. So we do have a group question, an attendee question that would be great if we could answer. So, Jeremy, the question was, how do you set or reset expectations to your leadership when the culture change is not happening fast enough, right? Because it's that big barge you were talking about earlier. Yeah. So what do you do? How do you reset?
Yeah. So, you know, the beginning stages, there's a lot of explanations and defining and you know, we're going to do X for Y, like here, and pointing out the benefits. You know, I'm not just trying to make you do a stupid thing because it's stupid and I'm stupid and I want you to, you know, hate coming to work. Like, we need to achieve X. The result of that is Y. You know, the improvement to everyone is Z, whatever. Like, that's a starting point. Now, people may not buy in, they don't like it, change is hard, and whatever. So, a big piece of this, when we talk about accountability, I'm glad this question was asked, actually, because I meant to say this earlier, and I don't think I got back to it, but clear expectations and accountability is not just for the frontline team. It is for everyone.
I'm sorry, say that again.
That.
That was really good. Did everybody write that down?
I might even be a little bit harder on our leaders actually when it comes to this sort of thing. Like they need to know it, believe it, do it, achieve it, like all of that. Like they need to be held probably to a higher level of accountability than our frontline team members. But so as part of that, it's like you want to be able to give people some grace and some time and some understanding, but also not accept things that don't support the mission and the goals. Mm-hmm. And so creating some of those accountabilities, if the whatever that change is, like you need your leaders to be accountable to that as well. And so a lot of discussions, me asking questions like, if a leader comes to me and it's like, nobody wants to do, or everybody is saying, then it's like, okay, first, I bet it's nobody or everybody is probably not true. So like, what are we actually talking about here? And then having, whether it's me or another leader, but like having one-on-one conversations to kind of help. I remember driving into our headquarters to meet with one of our very tenured team leads to have a conversation about one of these crazy metrics and people having these accountabilities, and it just didn't seem fair. And there was just a lack of understanding, really. And so we sat there and we talked for like an hour, and I made sure to hear what that person was saying and try to make sure that I could understand, like, has there been a dilution in the message? Messages get watered down, from the person that said it to the next person that repeats it to the next person that repeats it. Like, that is just a reality. So if you're somebody that's a senior director or VP or director or whatever the case may be, and you're going to tell your direct report something, and then they're going to tell their direct report something, and then they're going to tell their people, like, the message will not be the same at the end. And the ability to respond to questions about it will not be the same. And you should do everything that you can to prepare people. And so anytime there's a big change, like we're having group conversations and like coming up with FAQs when it's appropriate, and getting people like, ask me the question that you think you're going to be asked so that we can prepare people and get them bought in. And then lastly, like, if somebody is choosing not to participate and engage and adhere to the expectations at a leader level, then we have to start having some different conversations with that leader, just like we would with a frontline team member. So there's kind of layers to it. It's like, explain in the beginning, educate, and then it's, the conversations change over time. But like I said, having the right expectations and accountabilities at all levels, but making sure people can get the answers that they need. If someone doesn't understand something, I want to know that. I want their leader to know that. And I want us to have the opportunity to have a really good discussion about that, so we can address, there's usually some sort of misunderstanding in there.
So when we have set the culture of accountability, you've moved away from data mining to more meaningful conversations. Can you describe any qualitative improvements in performance, such as an improvement in, employee engagement or skill development as a result of those more substantive coaching sessions?
Yeah, a lot of these things kind of go together.
Yeah.
When you're executing on the mundane, answer the phone on time and get people to show, whatever, that sort of thing, like, a lot of things just become easier, and you're able to move to the more complex and the more important and that sort of thing. So I think kind of a combination of our ability to manage accountabilities, and then freeing up some of our time and mental capacity to be thinking about how we support our team members and engage them and develop them and all those sorts of things. There was nothing at the organization level in terms of like employee engagement kind of assessments. And so we created our own in partnership with HR. I would always recommend you do that to the extent that you can. And then creating a process around that, and then taking that data and saying like, all right, based on what you've said, here's the commitments we're taking. So back to this whole idea of accountability, 3 to 4 areas that we need to focus on based on what you've told us. We're going to focus on them, and we have specific things that we're going to do. We have specific accountabilities at individual team member levels. So Jeremy is accountable for this action that supports this focus area that's going to improve engagement based on the feedback that we receive to our team members. And so kind of this culture of accountability is like, I don't even necessarily like think about it. It's just this thing that we do, and it's just a part of who we are. But so then, yes, like engagement improves, our attrition, oh my gosh, I don't even want to tell you what it was at one point to where it is now. It was higher than I had ever seen it probably anywhere. And now we're probably best or top, 10% or whatever in the industry when it comes to attrition. And so that is about accountabilities at all levels, getting the support that they need, giving them a voice, making sure that they understand what it looks like to do their job well. Like all of these things just kind of fit together. So that's one of the biggest things I would say is there was a point where we were hiring and hiring and hiring and hiring, and we could never stop. And now we're like, God, we can't hire for a while. Like, what are we going to do? Like, we might have to bring on a couple of people next October, I guess. So things have shifted as a result.
Ooh, I like that. So how has Amplify made this journey easier for you?
Again, I think the biggest thing is the time that we get back. Now, I will say something I didn't talk about that I think is a really good conversation to have too is you guys forced us to define things in a very clear way. And if there was something that wasn't clearly defined or there wasn't a clear expectation, like you gently guided us and forced us through that process. And so there's some aspects of that too, where it's like you can't just have a vague idea of what it looks like to be successful. And so walking through that process, getting super crystal clear on all of the things, what are the measures, are they important, and then again, the time. So going through that process created a lot of clarity. And then we get all this time back that we get to reinvest into likely more valuable things.
Jeremy, one last quick one for you. Mm-hmm. One of those clear definition points that we usually see is a big value add for clients is defining the behaviors that are coached. So I'm just kind of asking you, beyond defining metrics and data and how it gets associated to people, how did you find that activity of defining the metrics, the input behaviors to the output metrics as part of the coaching process?
I think in large part that gets back to something that I was talking about earlier about, you can't just put a number in front of a person and say, make that number better.
Right.
And so if we define very clearly, what are the things that lead to the goal, to the outcome, then that positions not only the agents, but the leaders as well to make sure that they're focusing on the right things. Like, what is the action? What is the behavior, to your point, that will influence the metric to help us achieve the goal versus just, hey, I need a 7 to be a 10 and I need a 93% to be a 98%. Like that that's lost on most people. But if you can talk about behaviors, skills, actions, tasks, hey, let's commit to doing this thing, over the next week. And if we do that, we think that that's going to have this result. And then we're going to be able to check back in the next week and validate. Hey, did the things that we committed to doing, did we have some gains from it? Yes or no? If it's no, okay, let's try it again. If it's yes, awesome, let's do more of that. So I think that's an important piece.
Absolutely. And do you feel like everyone now understands the language or the names of those behaviors because they're part of the everyday performance conversation?
Yeah, and again, I think like defining them in this way.
Yeah.
Versus, if me and a couple of my direct reports have a conversation, how does that cascade? Versus we've defined it, it's in the system, it's developed in this way. Like you just build it in a way that it can't get so watered down, and it's very clear to everybody what these things are.
I love it. Thank you for that. It's brilliant. So happy for the journey that you've had both outside and inside of AmplifAI. Frankly, your leadership is evident and your success is exciting. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Danielle, sorry, back to you.
No worries. I saw the poll question go out to kind of pull out and see who's interested in a performance assessment. And I think that wraps what we had to cover today. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for sharing your journey, your insight, your successes, your challenges, your process. Thanks for being an open book and just sharing with us and the rest of the team. And we really hope that you guys were able to get some gems and jewels, some nuggets to take back to your organization.
Yeah, hopefully they weren't just bored to tears by me this whole hour.
I doubt that, Jeremy. It's a great story. Very, very compelling. So thank you so much. Dylan, anything else before we close?
As you leave this webinar, you'll be asked to give feedback. We're looking to do a lot more of these, bring more thought leaders like Jeremy to the table. And so any feedback that you have will definitely help us get better and have access to that real-time data that we've been talking about for the past 45 minutes.
Yeah, very good. Thank you all so much. Have a brilliant day.
All right.
Have a great day.
Bye.